Mexico has no shortage of famous legends. Everyone has heard of La Llorona, El Chupacabras, or El Charro. Tonight we are talking about forgotten Mexican urban legends with dark origins, not myths, not campfire stories, real legends that came from real places, real fear, and real consequences. We are starting with some of the most disturbing ones first. There is a stretch of road near Monterrey that locals avoid after midnight. Drivers report their engines stalling, radios turning on by themselves, and a tall figure appearing in the road ahead. The legend says this road was built over land used for executions during the Mexican Revolution. Prisoners were lined up and shot, their bodies buried where they fell. In the 1970s, several fatal accidents occurred on that same stretch. Survivors claimed they swerved to avoid hitting a man who suddenly appeared in front of their vehicle, a man who vanished the moment they crashed. Traffic authorities installed lighting and signage, but accidents continued. Eventually, locals named it El Camino del Diablo. Taxi drivers still refuse late-night fares that require using that road. The legend says he looks like a gentleman, but if you accept his help, you pay for it. El Charro is one of Mexico's most recognizable night road legends. He appears as a tall, elegant man in a perfect black suit, usually riding a massive black horse. He shows up when you are alone, tired, broke, desperate, or all of the above, and he offers exactly what you want: a ride home, money, a shortcut, a job, relief. But the deal is never free. In many versions, El Charro is tied to the devil, or at least to a force that functions like it. He is not just a scary rider, he is a test. The greedy, the reckless, and the people who make desperate bargains are the ones who end up in trouble. This is why the legend is so Mexican in its cultural bones. The Charro is a national symbol. The horseman should represent pride, skill, tradition. The legend flips it and says sometimes the most familiar outfit is the best disguise. The dark origin here is not just religion, it is the reality of travel. For centuries, roads at night were dangerous. Bandits, accidents, getting lost, getting stranded. If a stranger offered you help, you had to make a choice fast, and if you chose wrong, you might not make it home. El Charro is basically that decision turned into a character, and the detail people love adding is the moment the mask slips. Sometimes you see his boots and they're not boots. Sometimes you notice his horse is too tall, too still, like it's carved out of shadow. Sometimes you realize you cannot remember where you first saw him, and the moment you say yes, the legend says you stop being a person on a road. You become a lesson. The worst part about a Nahual is not what it turns into, it's that it might already be someone you know. This is one of the deepest, oldest ideas in Mesoamerican belief. Depending on the region and the version, these can be a human with a spiritual animal companion, or a person who can transform into an animal, or a ritual specialist feared for being able to harm or heal in ways that feel impossible. In rural storytelling, these people are often blamed when something weird happens at night. Strange animal sounds that feel too intelligent, a dog that stares too long, a turkey that follows you, a coyote that does not run when you shout. The legend fills in the gap and says that this is not an animal, that is a person wearing an animal. Colonial records and scholarship show that belief in these shape-shifting accusations were taken seriously enough to be discussed in legal and religious contexts. This was not just campfire material. It tied into fears about idolatry, witchcraft accusations, and community conflict. So the legend has layers. There is a shop window in Chihuahua where people don't just look at the mannequin. They stare like they're waiting for proof. La Pascualita is a legendary bridal mannequin displayed in Chihuahua, famous for looking so lifelike that people swear it cannot be a mannequin. The legend claims it is actually a preserved human body placed in the window after a tragedy. That claim has never been proven, and that uncertainty is part of why the story keeps breathing. In this case, the detail is in the hands. People talk about the skin tone, the nails, the realism. Some say the eyes even look wet. Others claim she changes position slightly, or that the staff refuse to touch her directly when they change the dress. So if you visit, the legend says you do not tap the glass, you do not joke about her, and if you think she blinked, you do not tell anyone you were alone when it happened. Imagine waking up in a hospital at night and the kindest nurse you've ever met is someone no one else can find. La Planchada is a famous Mexico City hospital legend often linked to Hospital Juarez. She is described as a nurse with an impeccably pressed uniform who appears late at night, checks on patients, brings comfort, and then vanishes before anyone can thank her. There are many versions of her backstory, but the common thread is heartbreak and duty. A nurse who was devoted to her work, who experienced betrayal or loss, and who returned after death still doing what she believed she was born to do. Mexican media retellings openly describe it as legend, and the story persists in part because hospitals are the perfect environment for it. The dark origin here is human. Hospitals at night are lonely. People are afraid. Staff are exhausted. Patients are half asleep, medicated, and disoriented, and sometimes a stranger really does help you, but you never learn their name. That's the real-life gap the legend crawls into. In the late 1990s, people across Mexico started waking up to dead livestock, and one name spread faster than any explanation: Chupacabras. El Chupacabras is a modern Mexican urban legend powerhouse. The name and earliest wave of reports are often traced back to Puerto Rico in 1995, but the legend rapidly spread into Mexico and became part of rural and national conversation. The classic story is always the same shape. Animals are found dead with strange puncture marks. People say there's no blood. People say the creature was seen near the pen moving weird with spines, or like a hairless dog, or like something that shouldn't exist. Then the fear multiplies because nobody agrees on what it looked like, only that it was there. What makes this a true urban legend is how it behaves socially. It spreads through communities as a warning, it creates a shared enemy, it gives a label to something frightening and unexplained, and even today major references describe it as folklore, while also noting that later sightings are often explained by animals with severe mange or other diseases. And here is the final creepy detail that people swear by. They say the Chupacabras doesn't just take animals, it takes sleep. Because once you believe it's out there, you start listening at night for every sound in the brush, every rustle, every distant bark, and your mind just does the rest. In Durango, there's an old legend of a bride who appears near abandoned churches. Witnesses describe a woman in a wedding dress standing silently by the roadside. When approached, her face is smooth and blank, like skin stretched over nothing. The legend originates from reports in the early 1900s of a woman who died waiting for a groom who never arrived. She was buried in her wedding dress. Travelers claimed encounters for decades. Several car accidents were attributed to drivers swerving to avoid her, and whether psychological or something else, the consistency of reports across generations makes this one of Mexico's most persistent forgotten legends. If you see a doll hanging from a tree in Xochimilco, it might not be there to scare you. It might be there as an offering. The canals of Xochimilco are part of a UNESCO World Heritage Site tied to the historic center of Mexico City, with the Chinampa landscape recognized for its cultural significance. Within the real protected environment, there is a place that became globally infamous, Isla de las Muñecas, the island of the dolls. The verified core is that a man lived and worked in the area and became associated with an island covered in dolls over many years. Accounts of how and why vary, and that is where the legend takes over. Many tell it's a response to a drowned young person. Some versions claim his own death mirrored that story. The urban legend is that the dolls move, blink, or whisper, especially when the wind changes. Some say you should bring a doll if you visit, not as a souvenir, but as respect. And here is the dark origin. Even if you remove the paranormal, this is an environment shaped by tradition and survival, and a man's private fears or grief became a public spectacle. People call it haunted because that is easier than saying a person spent decades building a protective wall out of broken vases. Some museums feel educational. This one feels like you've accidentally walked into a room where the dead were not done being looked at. Guanajuato's famous mummies are real human remains, many dating back to the 1800s, preserved by local conditions and later displayed. Even in modern reporting, the key facts repeat. Bodies were exhumed after burial fees went unpaid, the remains were displayed for decades, and there are ongoing disputes over handling, conservation, and who should control them. That modern controversy matters because it feeds the legend. The urban myth says some of the mummies screamed when exhumed, and that a curse follows people who mock them or treat them like props. A lot of this likely comes from the unsettling appearance of naturally preserved bodies and the way tourism can blur into disrespect. The factual dark origin is not magic. It is economics, burial policy, and the ethics of display. When you put real human remains behind glass for entertainment, people will reach for supernatural language to explain the discomfort they cannot otherwise name. Nixik is famous for its Day of the Dead celebrations, but locals also speak of something else. According to legend, certain graves are guarded by spirits who do not appreciate visitors after dark. People who entered the cemetery late reported being chased out by unseen forces. Some claimed hands grabbed their ankles, others said the exits moved, trapping them inside. In the 1980s, police records note multiple injuries caused by falls and panic inside the cemetery at night. While authorities blame alcohol and poor lighting, residents insisted something else was at work. Even during celebrations, locals warn outsiders to leave before midnight.
MKUltra, one of the most infamous cases of mind control experimentation, began and ended in the 1950s, or so they say. Recent evidence suggests that the CIA's influence on the minds of the American population might actually be ongoing and getting stronger by the minute. For those of you who don't know, MKUltra was an illegal human experimentation designed to identify whether or not illicit substances could be used as mind control devices. Those involved in the experiment underwent rigorous cycles of being pumped full of substances and then tormented until their minds began to blur the lines between fiction and reality. And the majority of individuals involved in the process lived out the rest of their days institutionalized and in need of around-the-clock care. Essentially, their lives ended the day the experiment began. Today, the widespread increase of prescriptions of psychotropic medications has people wondering if the experiment is still possibly taking place on a much larger, bolder scale, and if those suffering from mental illnesses in North America have become the new unwitting test subjects to this modern-day version of MKUltra. Theories that prescription drugs combined with subliminal messaging in social media campaigns being used to brainwash the public has been a growing topic in the past few years, leading me to personally wonder, could there be some truth to this?
So before MKUltra and Project Artichoke, there was Project Bluebird. This was a secret CIA program that began in 1952. Main goal here was to explore ways to control human behavior through hypnosis, illicit substances, and psychological techniques. The CIA wanted to see if they could use these methods to gather intelligence, make people do things against their will, and protect their own agents from enemy mind control. This one's also famous for using a specific psychedelic substance during the experiments. It also used sensory deprivation and hypnosis, where they do stuff like plant fake memories and false information in the test subjects. They also experimented with sleep deprivation to put them into a more vulnerable state, and they'd use harsh psychological techniques to break down individuals' resistance in an attempt to strip them of their sense of self. It was all very extreme, and this was just the project that paved the way for the larger scaled MKUltra. It doesn't sound like something that would happen in real life. It sounds like the plot of an over-the-top spy thriller, but unfortunately, these dark chapters in US history really did happen.
Before I hop off the MKUltra train, I have to mention one more reason people believe the experiments to be ongoing today, and that is microchips. Of course, there is the more recent argument that these microchips are being implanted into our bloodstream through mandated injectable medicine, but that's not what I'm here to talk about today. What I actually want to talk about is ear candling, and the possible link between that and the continuation of CIA-sanctioned mind control experimentation. Now, I think we can all agree that ear candling is a fairly alternative medicinal practice, making those who participate in it the perfect candidates for government-sanctioned microchip mind control. In recent years, there have been several incidents of people claiming to have been implanted during their candling sessions. Bear with me. Reports of strange buzzing noises no one else can hear, headaches, and physical discomfort when interacting with something the CIA might consider anti-government propaganda after receiving an ear candling treatment have been making headlines in conspiracy communities as of late. But apparently it's not just urban legend and fear-mongering. In fact, one person claimed to have isolated one of these implants and observed it firsthand. Apparently, a practitioner cut the implant out of one of their ear candles after noticing something off about it prior to use. The implant appeared plastic, but moved like mercury when placed into a glass jar, and then overnight, it disappeared as though it had somehow dissolved in its container. I guess these implants are only designed to last in organic environments such as beeswax and the human body. If you have undergone candling recently and you're currently experiencing any of the symptoms I previously described while listening to this video, you might want to get that checked out.
The Stargate Project. This was one of America's nuttiest army units, but they were around for a long time. The unit was established in 1977. Their job was to investigate whether psychic abilities like remote viewing could be an asset to the military. And what exactly is remote viewing? Well, it's the ability to see stuff that's happening but from far away, using your mind. So for a long time there were whispers about a group like this actually existing. Most people scoffed at the idea and called it ridiculous until the Stargate Project became declassified in 1995. Yeah, they operated for that long. There were only about 15 to 20 individuals in the unit at any given time, and they operated out of a dingy wooden barracks. Remote viewers were asked to describe hidden military bases, find missing people, or even attempt to predict future events. Most of the time, though, their results were completely off the mark. In 1995, the government decided to shut down the Stargate Project, concluding that it hadn't produced enough useful information to justify the cost.
Sex workers are government spies hell-bent on taking down those who oppose the ruling class. While that might sound like a pretty heinous statement, at one point in time during the 1950s, it was right on the money. A sub-project of MK Ultra, appropriately named Operation Midnight Climax, began in 1954, and while it was technically part of MK Ultra, there were a few key differences in the way the two projects operated, namely consent. Operation Midnight Climax was designed to test the effects of illicit substances on non-willing and uninformed participants. Sex workers would select Johns, take them back to a room in a safe house, pump them full of a variety of substances, pleasure them, and then interrogate them, all while a CIA agent watched from behind one-way glass. The goal of the experiment was to study the correlation between mind control and sexual behavior, to see if a seduction mixed with a prescription cocktail might be a viable tactic that would allow American agents to gain control over enemy spies.
Legend goes that cruel, twisted strangers slip poison or razor blades into children's trick-or-treat bags. Parents check their kids' candy every year because of this. I mean, you should check. It's just the responsible thing to do, but some actually write poisoned Halloween candy off as a total myth. It isn't. Even though actual cases are incredibly rare, it has been known to happen. One of the most disturbing cases happened on Halloween night in 1974. A man named Ronald Clark O'Brien decided to take the life of his own son to collect a massive life insurance payout. To cover his tracks and to make it look like there was a random lunatic loose, O'Brien bought pixie sticks candy, opened them up, stuffed them with fatal doses of cyanide, and then stapled them shut. He gave one to his son, one to his daughter, and handed 3 out to random kids in the neighborhood. His son ate the candy and died before reaching the hospital. Thankfully, the other children didn't eat theirs. O'Brien, dubbed the Candyman by inmates, was rightfully executed in 1984. Good riddance. An escaped mental patient dressed in a white rabbit suit hides out in an old railway bridge in Virginia, attacking teenagers with an axe and hanging gutted rabbits from the framework. Classic urban legend kind of story, right? But it actually began with 2 genuine 1970 police reports in Fairfax County. On October 19th, a couple parked on a dark road saw a figure creep out of the bushes wearing a white suit with long bunny ears, screaming about private property. The man then hurled a hatchet straight through their passenger window before they floored it. 10 days later, a security guard named Paul Phillips spotted the same costumed man on the porch of an unfinished house. When confronted, the man began hacking a wooden pillar with an axe, threatening to chop off the guard's head. Philip went to grab his firearm, but the rabbit man bolted into the woods. Police received over 50 sightings in the coming weeks. The guy was now known as the Virginia Bunny Man, and some pretty wild rumors started to spread about him. One story went that the guy ate a cat alive. No one was ever caught. By the 90s, the internet transformed it into a ghost story about an escaped killer from 1904. The old asylum backstory is made up, but those two police reports from 1970 are entirely real. Who the man was, that's still a total mystery. In Quitman, Arkansas, there's an urban legend about a werewolf-like creature known as the Dog Boy of Quitman. The story goes that a creepy Victorian house in town was haunted by this giant werewolf-like monster. A cursed boy grew up there, eventually turning into a beast, walked on all fours, howled at the moon, and hunted local pets. But the real story, it's a million times worse. There was nothing supernatural about it. The monster was a real guy named Gerald Floyd Bettis. Born in 1954, Gerald was a huge kid who grew up to 6'4", weighing around 300 pounds. He got the nickname Dog Boy because he used to collect every stray dog and cat he could find. But he wasn't trying to save them. He built extra rooms onto his parents' house to trap the animals and torment them. Neighbors said they could hear the poor things crying from the street. Eventually, Gerald turned that cruelty on his own parents. He kept his elderly mom and dad locked upstairs, only letting them eat when he felt like it. One day, he threw his father right out of the second-story window. His dad survived by clinging to the ledge until cops showed up. Gerald was finally locked up after the state rescued his mom. He died in prison in 1988. If you're into history, you might have heard about the Angel's Glow story. The story goes that during a nasty Civil War battle, a bunch of wounded soldiers were saved by a literal miracle. As they lay there, dying in the dark, their open wounds suddenly started glowing with this blue light. Rumor was that angels had come down to the battlefield, using a heavenly glow to keep the men alive until medics could finally get to them. Sounds like a total fairy tale, but the glowing wounds were 100% real. Except it wasn't angels, it was glowing worms throwing up inside the soldiers' bodies. Sounds slightly less enchanting, but still very cool. Went down in April of 1862 at the Battle of Shiloh in Tennessee. It was brutal. Over 16,000 soldiers were wounded. Medics were obviously totally overwhelmed. Hundreds of men were left stranded out in the freezing rain and mud for 2 full days. As night fell, the men noticed this faint greenish blue light radiating right out of their injuries. When doctors finally reached them, they realized the guys who glowed actually healed way faster, survived at a much higher rate. The mystery wasn't solved until 2001, when a 17-year-old high school kid named Bill Martin visited the battlefield. His mom happened to be a microbiologist, so he and his friend decided to do a science project to figure out what actually happened. Well, they discovered that the mud at Shiloh was packed with tiny microscopic worms. When the soldiers sat in the freezing mud for days, their body temperatures dropped, creating the perfect chilly environment for these worms to crawl right into their open wounds. And once they got inside, the worms vomited up a special soil bacteria called Photorhabdus luminescens. This bacteria naturally glows in the dark, but more importantly, it acts as a natural antibiotic. It completely killed off all the bad, deadly germs in the wounds, basically sterilizing the injuries and saving the soldiers' lives. So, hey, it was kind of a miracle, just a miracle of nature. Project Chatter was another very controversial precursor to MK Ultra. Project Chatter was a secret US Navy program that began in the fall of 1947 and continued into 1953. The main goal of this project was to research and test different illicit substances and methods for interrogating prisoners and extracting information. The Navy was particularly interested in using substances to see if they could make people reveal secrets. They experimented with various ones, mainly mescaline and scopolamine, to see if they could break down a person's resistance and make them talk more freely. At the head of this program was Charles Savage at the Naval Medical Research Institute in Bethesda, Maryland. These experiments were conducted on both animals and humans, a lot of time without the subjects fully knowing what was happening, certainly in the case of the animals. And the results were not very promising. The substances often just confused rather than gave any clear and reliable information. The substances often just confused the subjects and really made it hard for them to provide clear and reliable information. After the Korean War ended in 1953, Project Chatter merged into MK Ultra.
Spending too much time on your phone or watching TV can have dire side effects, including falling under the spell of the Soviet Union and Igor Viktorovich Smirnov. In the late 1980s, as the Cold War neared its end, the Soviet military decided they needed to do something to keep the people of Russia from attempting to leave the Soviet Union, and so they enlisted the help of Igor Smirnov, who was known at the time for his almost mystical powers of persuasion. The plan was for Igor to use psychotechnology, subliminal messaging, to correct unwanted behaviors in Russian soldiers suffering from PTSD, and to see if the same methods could be applied to the Russian public. Igor called the process psycho-correction, a term that encompassed the use of subliminal messages to alter a subject's will and even make permanent changes to a subject's personality without their knowledge. As it is Russia, there is not much other information of the experiment, but in 1993, Smirnov was actually consulted by the FBI in regards to a terror cult holding down fort at Mount Carmel Center in Texas. He suggested piping subliminal messages into the phone lines of family members of the cult's leader, but the FBI declined. In 2004, Smirnov died, but it seems as though his legacy has continued, because in May of 2009, the Department of Homeland Security announced plans to incorporate some of Smirnov's methods into airport security screening systems.
The Montauk Project has always been slagged off as a conspiracy, but when I describe it, you tell me if it really sounds all that far-fetched compared to everything else on this list, most of which has been declassified and 100% verified. The theory claims secret government experiments took place at Camp Hero, a decommissioned military base in Montauk, New York. According to the theory, these experiments focused on time travel, mind control, and contact with extraterrestrial life. I mean, maybe the time travel part is a little far-fetched, but at the same time, if the government's willing to take mind control seriously, why wouldn't they dip into the time travel game as well? Might as well. The project is said to have started sometime in the 70s. It's said that scientists were trying to unlock psychic abilities like telepathy and remote viewing, and some will even claim they succeeded in creating time portals. That part I'm more skeptical of. Attempted, maybe. Succeeded, highly unlikely. But Preston B. Nichols and Peter Moon made the whole conspiracy even more well-known when they published the book The Montauk Project: Experiments in Time in 1992. Nichols described his own apparent experiences in the project, claiming to have recovered repressed memories of being kidnapped on several occasions to continue his involvement in the experiments.
Could you be convinced to kill? That was the question on the minds of high-clearance CIA agents back in 1951 when operations for Project Artichoke began at the order of the CIA's Office of Scientific Intelligence. The goal was to see if, through the use of various methods, including hypnosis, forced addiction and withdrawals to injectable substances, and oral substance use, a subject could be persuaded to involuntarily perform an act of attempted assassination, even if it were to cost the subject their own life. Basically, the government was curious to see exactly what it would take to strip a person of their inhibitions, morals, and willpower, while at the same time keeping them lucid enough to successfully perform the act. During the lifespan of the experiment, one subject was kept on psychotropics for 77 days straight. Whether or not the project was successful remains unknown. It's the CIA after all, but in a declassified report, a CIA agent stated that if the hypnosis succeeded, assassins could be created to assassinate a prominent, redacted, politician, or, if necessary, an American official. As far as we know, the project ended in 1953. As far as the CIA knows, it's probably still ongoing.
The Montreal experiments were a series of highly unethical clinical trials with the goal of treating schizophrenia, at least at first, but things got out of hand. Beginning in 1957, at the Allen Memorial Institute in Montreal, the experiments were led by Dr. Donald Ewan Cameron and were partly funded by the CIA as part of their MK Ultra program. Dr. Cameron's experiments involved a method he called psychic driving, which included all these intensive treatments like repeated electroshock therapy and playing recorded messages on a loop for patients. He was trying to literally erase patients' memories and reprogram their minds. Sensory deprivation was also used, which was far worse in this case than it sounds. Of course, the eyes and ears were covered, but then patients would be almost starved, also given very little water, and then injected with substances to put them into this vegetative state. Absolutely nightmarish, and obviously there were severe side effects here, including memory loss and personality changes. Many of these test subjects were just never the same again. And we're starting off with a Gryla. Gryla is an old Icelandic myth about a giantess who's not your typical grandma. She's a bit of a nightmare, literally. She lives up in the mountains and has a taste for human flesh, especially if you've been misbehaving. And even worse, she's got a whole family. Legend has it she's been married 3 times, and her 13 sons, known as the Yule Lads, are real pieces of work too. But if you're lazy, disobedient, or just plain unlucky, you might end up on Gryla's menu. She stuffs her victims in a sack and takes them back to her cave where she cooks them in a large pot. Then you have her sons who come down from the mountains one by one in the 13 nights leading up to Christmas, mostly to play pranks on people. Each lad has his own thing, like stealing leftovers, slamming doors, or just being plain annoying. They're not quite as evil as their mom, just mischievous. Gryla's been around in Icelandic folklore for ages, used by parents as a way to keep their younger ones in check during the holiday season. And if you want to give yourself a gift this holiday season, why not subscribe to our channel? We have tons of videos coming your way on the daily, and most importantly, it's free to subscribe. Number 9, Hans Trapp. Hans Trapp is a bit of a dark character from the folklore in the Alsace and Lorraine regions of France. Long story short, he was a rich dude who got a bit too greedy and made a deal with the devil. So Hans Trapp starts doing some shady stuff like worshipping Satan and messing with the poor. The church wasn't too thrilled about that, so they excommunicated him. Hans got kicked out of his fancy life, loses his wealth, and ends up living in the woods like a hermit. But Trapp's story doesn't end there. He started disguising himself as a scarecrow, wearing old tattered clothes and putting hay on his body. He'd hang out in the fields, waiting for young ones to pass by. When some unfortunate soul came too close, he'd jump up and scare the living daylights out of them. The legend goes that Hans Trapp took his scarecrow act a step further and decided to snack on misbehaving youngsters. Yes, he'd kidnap and eat them. The whole scarecrow turned cannibal thing was a cautionary tale parents told their youngsters to keep them in line. Now, people in those parts don't forget Hans Trapp, and there's even a tradition where they dress up as him during Christmas, just to remind everyone to stay on the straight and narrow. In at number 8, we have Kalikidzaros. Kalikidzaros are these creatures that live underground, and for most of the year they're stuck there, trying to saw down the world tree. Weird, I know. The thing is, they believe that once they manage to cut it down, the whole world will collapse, and then they can take over. These creatures, during the 12 days of Christmas, are let loose on the surface, and they don't come out to spread cheer. Instead, they go out causing chaos, playing pranks, and generally being pains in the neck. Now, luckily, they forget what they're doing when the sun comes up, but every night they start their mischief all over again. People in Greece came up with some ways to keep these creatures busy and away from causing too much trouble. One trick is to burn a Yule log for the entire 12 days. Apparently, the light messes with their heads, and they forget their task. Another tactic is hanging a pig jawbone by the door, because Kalikidzaros are scared of pigs. Go figure. Next on the list is the Yule Cat. This is a giant cat from Icelandic tales, and it's incredibly strange. A lot of the stuff on this list is like, don't be bad, or you'll get beaten or eaten. Harsh legends, but at least they make sense. This one is a bit out of left field. As the legend goes, this enormous cat shows up around Christmas Eve, and it's a real dink of a cat because it torments people who don't receive new clothes to wear on Christmas Eve. So yeah, if you're not rocking some fresh threads for the holidays, this cat will come along and just straight up eat you. Back in the day, getting new clothes before Christmas was a big deal, and to make sure everyone got their act together, the Yule Cat legend was born. I don't know why I asked to take it all out on the people that don't get the clothes, though. That's not really up to them, but it's a cruel world out there. Number 6, Perchta. All right, this one gets pretty intense. Forget just eating people. things get very gory and specific here. Perchta, also known as Frau Perchta or Berchta, is said to roam around during the 12 days of Christmas from late December to early January. Now, she's got a bit of a dual personality thing going on. On one hand, she's a real sweetheart, rewarding good behavior, but she can change on a dime, punishing the lazy and messy severely. If you've been a decent human, Perchta might leave you a silver coin as a little holiday bonus. But if you've been slacking off, especially when it comes to household chores, just watch out. She's known for being a bit of a cleanliness freak, and if she catches wind of your messy ways, she might just decide to slice open your stomach, pull out your guts, and stuff you with straw or garbage. To say that punishment is a tad unhinged would be an understatement. In 2004, a woman using the name Hasume made a post on the Japanese forum 2channel while sitting on a train late at night. Other passengers were asleep. This was her normal commute to work, but the train hadn't stopped in a long time. Stations were being skipped and no announcements were being made. Hasume tried to contact the conductor or driver but couldn't get a response. Unsure what else to do, she posted online asking for advice. People started replying as she gave updates in real time. After about an hour, the train finally stopped. Hasume stepped onto an empty platform. The station sign read Kisaragi Station. There were no staff. The train departed, leaving her alone. She stayed at the station and continued posting. Users quickly searched online and told her there was no station by the name anywhere in Japan and urged her to leave immediately. Hasume walked outside and tried to find a taxi, but no dice. She eventually found a phone booth and called their parents, asking them to pick her up. They tried, but of course, they had no idea where Kisaragi Station was. As time passed, Hasume described the area as deeply unsettling. She could hear a bell tolling somewhere nearby, along with a drum beat that slowly grew louder. Deciding she couldn't stay there, she started walking along the train tracks to escape. While following the tracks, a voice suddenly shouted from behind her, "Hey, don't walk on the track, it's dangerous." When Hasume turned around, she saw a man. He only had one leg. For a moment she was relieved though, he'd be able to tell her where the hell she was, but then he vanished into thin air. Panicking, she ran into a nearby tunnel and injured herself along the way. After reaching the other side, a man greeted her and offered to help. The two returned to Kisaragi Station and boarded another train. This train carried them into a remote area of the Japanese Alps. At first the man was speaking normally, but then he slowly became incoherent, began muttering nonsense, and then fell silent. Hasume made one final post. "My battery's almost run out. Things are getting strange, so I think I'm gonna make a run for it." And that was the last anyone heard from her. This next one is called Gozu, the Cowhead Story. It's a story about a story. The story in question is said to be so terrifying that hearing it all the way through can kill you. At best, you'll be in a state of shock, unable to speak for the rest of your life. In some versions, listeners die days later in accidents after hearing it. Now, the most common version involves a teacher telling students a scary story on a bus or during class. Halfway through, the teacher realizes what he's saying and tries to stop, but it's too late. The teacher gets locked into this trance, unable to stop telling the story. When help arrives, the bus is wrecked or the class is unresponsive, with the teacher and students in a total daze, unable to speak, barely able to move. But what is this utterly terrifying story that puts listeners in a state of shock and utter terror? Nobody knows. This is that classic example that some of the scariest horror touches on the fear of the unknown, the unexplainable. Even Japanese horror writers have commented on it, saying the fear comes from suggestion. It's been referenced in Japanese literature and media as early as the 20th century. Late at night, on quiet roads, drivers in parts of Japan have reported a motorcycle coming up behind them. When the bike pulls alongside, the driver is horrified when they realize the biker has no head. In some versions of the legend, the rider is searching for his missing head. In others, he's looking for the person who caused his death. A few stories say he rides next to cars, matching their speed, tapping on their windows, or daring the driver to look straight at him. If they do, Crashes are said to follow not long after. The legends seem to come about after the Australian film Stone in 1974. There's a scene in the movie where a rider's head is lobbed off after running into a wire stretched across the road. When the movie reached Japan in 1981, stories about headless riders started spreading alongside real stories of motorcycle accidents. There are also more ordinary explanations. A rider in a dark full-face helmet on an unlit road can look headless at the right angle. And some Japanese bikers have even admitted to wearing non-reflective black helmets on purpose just to mess with drivers. And next we have the legend of Turbo Granny, which doesn't sound scary in the slightest. And the fact that this is a Japanese story, it's kind of making me picture a huge mech robot in the form of an old lady, but the tale is actually much creepier. The story goes that if you're driving on mountain roads late at night, especially in rural areas, you might see an elderly woman running beside your car. At first you assume it's your eyes playing tricks on you, but then you speed up and she keeps pace. Some versions say she can run over 100 kilometers per hour. Others say she rides in the back of your car, laughing and tapping on your trunk and windows. If you stop, she'll just catch up. If you don't, accidents tend to happen. Drivers report engines stalling, steering locking, or tires blowing out right as she appears. Turbo Granny became popular in the 80s and 90s when car culture really exploded in Japan and young drivers were racing through mountain passes at night. She became a kind of roadside ghost story. Some versions say she's the spirit of an old woman killed by a car. Others say she's always existed, attached to roads where people often die. Hanako-san is one of the first ghost stories Japanese kids ever hear, which might be why it never really leaves them. She's said to haunt school bathrooms, usually on the third floor, third stall. Knock 3 times and ask if she's there. Sometimes she answers, sometimes she comes out. The details change depending on the area. In some versions she's harmless, in others she drags people into the toilet where they're never seen again. As for her origin story, some say she died in World War II during air raids while hiding in the school. Another version says she was being followed by a man, and the bathroom is where she was hiding when she was killed. There's something so unsettling about the idea of a ghost haunting a bathroom stall. I think it's the vulnerability of it, when you're literally being caught with your pants down. Back in the late 70s, people in Japan weren't just talking about this one, they were scared enough that schools sent kids home in groups, and police departments made public statements about it. Kuchisaki Onna, or the slit-mouthed woman. The story goes like this. A woman approaches you in the street, usually wearing a surgical mask. She asks, "Am I pretty?" If you say no, she ends your life on the spot. If you say yes, she removes the mask and reveals the torn smile, sometimes lined with sharp teeth, and asks again, "Even now?" Say no or scream and you're dead. Say yes and she cuts your mouth to match hers. Some say she used to be a beautiful woman who was attacked by her jealous sister. Other versions say it was a botched cosmetic or dental procedure. Next up we have the Red Room Curse. This one became popular on Japanese message boards in the early 2000s. The setup is always the same. You're using your computer late at night and a red pop-up window appears. It asks, "Do you like the Red Room?" You can't close it. No matter what you do, it stays. And then a voice starts listing names. As it goes on, the screen fills with red. According to the story, the final name is yours. And after that, you're found dead in a room covered in BLOOD. Now, what pushed this beyond just an internet scare was a real case in 2004. A schoolgirl, simply referred to as Girl A to the media, took the life of a classmate and later talked about being obsessed with the Red Room story. So, news coverage at the time tied the two together. There's a stretch of mountains in Fukuoka where there's said to be a hidden village known as Inunaki. You're driving through the mountains, following narrow roads when your phone signal fades. Somewhere near the old Inunaki tunnel, there's a small side road, and that road is where the legend of Inunaki village begins. People who claim to have found it describe a handwritten sign near the entrance, which says the Japanese Constitution does not apply beyond this point. According to the story, the people living there reject the government entirely. There are no police, no laws. Once you pass the sign, you're on your own. One of the earliest stories places the origin in the early 70s. A young couple driving toward Hisayama had their car break down and went into the forest looking for help. They came across a quiet village, so quiet it almost looked abandoned. But then an old man popped out of a house, attacking them with a sickle. Another version centers on a telephone booth near Inunaki Bridge. Supposedly it rings late at night. The call always comes from Inunaki Village. People who answer are said to be drawn there and cursed. First they lose control of their thoughts, then their body follows. Now what keeps this legend alive is the real place around it. There was a real village, founded in 1691 and later abandoned and submerged during the construction of the Inunaki Dam. Nearby is the old Inunaki Tunnel, sealed after a man was burned alive inside it in 1988. Next up is Teke Teke. Most versions of this story start the same way. The kid is walking home after dark, maybe near train tracks, usually near train tracks, but maybe cutting through a quiet street they've taken 100 times before, when they hear something behind them. It's not footsteps, something dragging. Teke Teke is said to be the ghost of a schoolgirl who fell onto train tracks and was cut in half instead of dying, and then she just crawls around using her arms, pulling herself along the ground. The sound she makes while moving is where the name comes from, a hard, scraping noise that gets closer and closer no matter how fast you walk. If she catches you, she kills you the same way. And she doesn't get tired. Running doesn't help. Hiding doesn't work either, because once she's noticed you, she always knows where you are. The story spread through schools for years, especially in areas with busy train lines. And finally, we have Akamanto. Most versions put him in school bathrooms, usually the girls' room, the last stall at the far wall. You're on the toilet when you hear him, a calm voice that asks a simple question: red paper or blue paper? If you look up, he's standing there wearing a red cloak and a mask that hides his face. If you pick red, you die violently, slashed and flayed. If you pick blue, you're strangled until you turn blue and collapse. And if you try to be clever, asking for a different color, he drags you away somewhere, never to be seen again. Some say you're pulled straight into hell. The only way out, according to the stories, is to refuse the game. So, say you don't want either. Don't answer, just get up and leave. The Amazon rings. These are a series of strange ring-shaped ditches scattered throughout the rainforest, and no one really knows what they are or why they exist. The rings are ancient though, way older than the rainforest itself. Some archaeologists think the rings were used as burial grounds or maybe even as a form of defense, but there's no solid proof to back either story. It's all just guesswork. Alright, so you know what I'm gonna say next? Let's just get right to it. Some people think they were left by aliens. The idea is that the rings could have been caused by spaceships landing long before the rainforest grew over them. It's a pretty far out theory, obviously, but given that we still can't explain these rings, it's one that people keep tossing around. What makes the Amazon rings even more mysterious is that no one can figure out how ancient people would have managed to make them. The tools that would have been needed to carve out such precise shapes just doesn't seem to have existed back then. It's almost like these rings just appeared out of nowhere. So yeah, maybe they were made by some lost civilization or something else entirely. Alright, back to some big hairy ape guys, the Miracoxi. This is basically the South American version of Bigfoot creatures. These creatures are said to be massive, ape-like beings that can grow up to 12 feet tall. Imagine walking through the jungle and coming in contact with something that huge. Horrifying. And while they look pretty primitive, they're actually supposed to be pretty smart. They're said to use bows and arrows, and some reports claim they even live in villages. One of the most famous encounters with the creatures came from Colonel Percival H. Fawcett, a British explorer who was mapping out the jungles of South America back in 1914. Fawcett claimed that he came across these creatures north of a tribe called the Maksubi. He described them as big, super hairy, living in the wild and grunting instead of talking. He also said they were extremely hostile toward humans. In his book Lost Trails, Lost Cities, Fawcett tells the story of how he and his crew got really close to these creatures and things almost got violent. The creatures were about to attack, but Fawcett and his men managed to scare them off by shooting their firearms into the ground. But in 1925, Fawcett and his entire expedition vanished without a trace while trying to find the lost city of Z. Some think they were killed by local tribes, others think they might have just starved or got lost, eaten by animals, but there's also a theory that they were killed by the Marikoxene. Next up, we have the Boiling River. The Boiling River, also known as Chene Timpishka, is a very hot river found in the Amazon rainforest in Peru. It's not the type of river you're going to want to take a dip in because the water can get really hot. Not sauna hot, I mean boiling hot. A hot cup of tea kind of hot. This river is about 4 miles long, and in some parts the water temperature can reach up to nearly 212 degrees Fahrenheit or 100 degrees Celsius. You can boil an egg in this river, and I'm not exaggerating. The YouTube channel Nas Daily actually posted a video trying that exact thing. So exactly what is going on here? Well, scientists think it has something to do with geothermal activity deep down in the earth. There might be some hot rocks or something heating up the water before it bubbles to the surface. That's my version of just explaining that science. I'm sure there's much more to it than that. But local shamans also have legends about an entity known as Yakumama, a giant serpent spirit known as the mother of the waters that causes the water to boil. In 2012, deep in the jungles of Ecuador, explorers discovered the remains of what looked like a lost city. It became known as the Lost City of Giants. A group of explorers, along with a few locals who knew the area well, set out to find it, and according to them, the city had always been a legend passed down through generations. When they finally arrived, they found something truly bizarre. These massive, towering structures. The biggest of these was a pyramid that stood an insane 79 meters or 260 feet tall. It had a weird shape as well that set it apart from anything the explorers had ever seen. At the top of the pyramid was this flat, polished stone, which the locals believed was a sacrificial altar. The sheer size of the buildings led a lot of people to believe that this city could have only been built by giants. Archaeologists who visit the site have some mixed opinions, though. Some are convinced that the giants might have been involved. Others just don't really buy it. But it gets weirder, though. Along with these structures, the explorers found oversized tools and artifacts. The tools were so big that, according to the team, there's no way a regular human could have used them. We've all heard the vague urban legends about someone stumbling into their bathroom in the middle of the night, half asleep, lifting up the toilet lid, only to hear something splashing around inside, and then they look down and see a wet, frantic rat in the water. For decades, there have been stories of terrifying creatures lurking in city sewers. Most famous one is probably the classic myth about New Yorkers flushing baby alligators down their drains, creating this colony of giant gators beneath the streets. Luckily, most of that is fake. People may have flushed baby gators down the toilet, as cruel as that is, but alligators would freeze to death down there in the winter. But finding a live rodent swimming in a toilet bowl, that is absolutely possible. The toilet's drain pipes are usually at least 3 inches wide, which gives a rat plenty of room to move. They're drawn into the sewer lines looking for food scraps, and because they're expert swimmers who can hold their breaths for minutes, they have no problem navigating the pipes right into your home. In 1999, a woman in Petersburg, Virginia was actually bitten on the rear end by a rat that crawled up out of her toilet. So, new fear unlocked. Here's a classic Toronto urban legend that turned out to actually be true. If you grew up around here, you've probably heard the story about a lawyer, in some versions he's a real estate agent, who had a weird habit of sprinting full speed into his office windows just to prove how indestructible the glass was. Well, one day when he slams into a pane, it gives way, and he flies straight out of the skyscraper to his death. His story is actually 100% true. The man was Gary Hoy, a super successful corporate lawyer and senior partner at a firm located on the 24th floor of the Toronto Dominion Centre. Gary was incredibly proud of the building's architecture and loved showing off the safety of the modern glass. Well, on July 9th, 1993, the firm was hosting a party for a group of visiting law students. Wanting to impress the new recruits, Gary decided to perform his signature stunt. He took a running start across his office and threw his entire weight directly into the glass wall. The glass didn't shatter, actually. Instead, Gary hit the window so hard the entire pane popped right out of the steel frame. Gary and the massive sheet of glass plummeted 24 stories. He died instantly. And fun fact, back in high school, I was hanging out at a buddy's place, and we got to talking about this story, and his dad was like, yeah, it's true. I actually knew the guy. The CIA using cats as spies? That sounds incredibly far-fetched, but in the 60s, they actually ran a program doing exactly that. It was called Acoustic Kitty, and it came from the CIA's Office of Technical Service, the same group working on experimental surveillance tools during the Cold War. The idea was to turn a cat into this mobile listening device that could casually wander near Soviet targets without raising suspicion. They surgically implanted this tiny microphone in the cat's ear canal, ran a thin transmitter under its skin, and placed a wire antenna along its body and tail. In theory, the cat would be trained to sit near conversations and transmit audio back to a nearby receiver. After years of very expensive preparation, the first field test was a complete disaster. The cat was released near a park close to the Soviet embassy in Washington, D.C. But, like something straight out of Austin Powers, instead of walking toward the target, it wandered into oncoming traffic and was hit by a taxi. So that put an end to that program. You know that irrational fear you get when elevator doors open and for a split second you're terrified the car isn't actually there, or worse, the machine will start suddenly moving while you're halfway inside. Well, back in 2003, that became a gruesome reality at a hospital in Houston, Texas. Dr. Hitoshi Nakaido was a 35-year-old surgical resident at Christus St. Joseph Hospital. On August 16th, his colleague Karen Stenau was standing inside an elevator on the second floor, holding the door for him as he rushed to catch a ride. The elevator had actually been out of service for repairs just days before, but warning signs were gone, so they assumed that it was totally safe. Nakaido asked if it was working, and as he stepped forward, tried to shoulder his way through the closing doors. Normally, the sensors would force the doors back open, right? The elevator completely malfunctioned. Instead of stopping, the car immediately started rising with Nakaido still pinned right in the doorway. He tried to pull himself back, but he was completely trapped. As the elevator forced its way upward, Nakaido's head was crushed by the ceiling of the doorway. His body fell all the way down to the bottom of the elevator shaft, but the absolute worst part, his head fell backward right into the elevator car. Karen was trapped inside that broken lift with the remains of her colleague for over an hour before rescue workers could finally get her out. We've all heard the creepy urban legends about people hearing weird scratching or thumping noises inside their walls, assuming it's just mice, only to find someone was actually trapped in there. Well, in May 2011, this happened at a bank in Abbeville, Louisiana. The bank started renovating their empty second floor, and a construction worker went to tear down an old closed-off brick chimney. When he pulled on some fabric hanging from the chute, he was showered with old clothes and human bones. The police ran DNA tests, finally put an end to a 27-year-old mystery. The remains belonged to a 22-year-old guy named Joseph Schneider, completely vanished all the way back in January 1984. At the time, he was running from a minor stolen vehicle charge, so when he disappeared, his family just assumed that he'd skipped town to evade the cops. Instead, he'd gone up onto the bank's roof and tried to slide down the narrow chimney feet first. The pipe narrowed at the bottom, trapping his arms and pinning him. The bank sealed off the chimney from the outside later that decade, completely unaware that he was inside. So day-to-day life went on for nearly 3 decades at that bank, with staff and customers completely unaware there was a dead body inside the chimney. You probably heard some version of this next one. A woman is driving home late at night when a car starts following her. The driver behind her keeps flashing her headlights, riding her bumper. Terrified, she thinks she's being stalked. She finally races to a gas station or a police station, only to discover the person following her was actually the one trying to save her, because there's someone hiding in her back seat. It sounds like a classic campfire story, but versions of this have happened in real life. One of the best documented cases happened in 1964 in New York. A police officer noticed a vehicle driving a bit erratically, repeatedly flashed his lights to get the driver to pull over. When the car finally stopped, the officer approached and discovered a man crouched on the floor in the rear of the vehicle holding a blade. The suspect had apparently slipped into the car unnoticed while it was parked. Over the years, police departments across North America have reported similar incidents, intruders hiding in people's vehicles, so always check your back seat before getting in your car. Number 6, the urban legend of temporary tattoos being laced with hallucinogens. The myth here began at sometime in the 70s, and it goes that drug dealers looking to get young ones hooked early would lace the packages of temporary tattoos with stuff. One tale goes as follows. Two young cousins embarked on their annual Halloween adventure, eagerly trick-or-treating in their neighborhood. Upon returning home, though, their eyes widened with delight as they discovered unicorn temporary tattoos nestled among all their candy. And they were oblivious to the danger that lurked within, and they excitedly showed their mothers their newfound tattoos. The moms, unaware of the impending danger, assumed the tattoos were harmless novelties and permitted the daughters to apply them. But within moments, strange things started to happen. Their behavior became erratic, resembling the effects of potent substance of some kind. The mothers swiftly rushed their daughters to the emergency room in the hospital. Doctors were also baffled by the girls' symptoms. They suspected some form of intoxication, prompting the police to seize all the Halloween candy, but there was nothing wrong with the candy. And the following day, one of the mothers stumbled upon the discarded package of the temporary tattoo. She took the evidence to the local police station, where a lab analysis on the tattoo packaging confirmed their worst fears. The temporary tattoos had been deliberately laced with a potent hallucinogenic drug. There's no evidence of this ever having happened. And next, we have the razor blades, needles, or various other sharp, dangerous objects in candy urban legend. This is one that's been around for years. I remember my mom making us let her inspect our candy when we got back from trick-or-treating before we ran off back to our room with it. It's a valid concern. There's some messed up people out there. Even though this is often placed into the urban legend category, though, stuff like this has been known to happen, which is deeply unsettling. The idea that someone would take pleasure in harming innocent trick-or-treaters just completely at random, not even seeing the aftermath, just knowing they caused harm, can't wrap my head around that. Luckily, there aren't many instances of genuine harm having been caused, but the fact that some sick people have even tried is disturbing. One well-known case was from 2000, when a guy was found having inserted needles into chocolate. Luckily, no one got hurt though. Number 4, black cat sacrifices. There's always been a superstition surrounding black cats, right? That if one crosses your path, you'll have bad luck coming your way. There's also a more contemporary urban legend surrounding black cats though. Here though, the black cats are the victims. If you own a black cat, you may want to keep yours inside on Halloween after this story. The legend goes that a woman was up one Halloween night watching some scary movies when she decided to turn in for the night. Her cat was nowhere to be found, but he liked to wander around in the evening sometimes, so she figured he'd make his way back when he felt like it. Morning came though, and he still wasn't around. She spent days looking for her cat, even put up flyers, but started to notice she wasn't the only one putting up flyers for a missing black cat. A bunch of folks in the neighborhood had also lost theirs. In the end, it was supposedly discovered that a bunch of black cats had been gathered and sacrificed by a satanic cult in the area. Next, we have another ritual game, the triple mirror game. Legend has it that this one is perfect to play on Halloween night, and this is when the spirit world partially crosses over with our own. Legend has it that this ritual allows players to contact spirits. According to the ancient tale, a group of mystics created 3 enchanted mirrors that, when used together under specific conditions, could open a portal to realms unknown. These mirrors were believed to have unique powers, one showing the past, the second revealing the present, and the third unveiling the future. But the mirrors were also said to be a gateway to the spirit world, where restless souls and mischievous entities resided. The legend warned that those who dared to play with these mirrors risked encountering otherworldly forces, and if not careful, might be trapped in the spirit realm forever. First, play this game, you'll need 3 mirrors, a dark, quiet room, and a candle. Choose a room where you won't be disturbed, and preferably after midnight. Dim the lights or use candlelight to create the atmosphere. Arrange 3 mirrors so that you bounce the reflection of the door from one mirror to the next. And supposedly if you stare into the 3rd mirror long enough, you might start to see shadowy figures of spirits that have made their way into your home. When you're ready to end the session, thank the mirrors and visualize the energy dissipating. Turn on the lights, dispel the eerie atmosphere, and break the connection. All right, similar now to the sharp objects in Candy Myth, now we have the poison candy. This one's pretty simple. Watch out, kids. Some creep may have poisoned your candy. Don't eat it if it smells like formaldehyde. Now, disturbingly, there is a real-life case of a trick-or-treater's candy being poisoned, only it wasn't a stranger that did it, it was his own father. Ronald Clark O'Brien decided to take the life of his own son, Timothy, on Halloween of 1974 by poisoning his pixie sticks with potassium cyanide. His motive, he wanted to claim life insurance money. Not only did he poison his own son though, he poisoned his daughter as well as 3 other trick-or-treaters in order to try and cover up the crime, making it harder to identify who did it. Luckily, the others didn't eat the candy, and Ronald was sentenced to death and died of lethal injection in 1984. Finally, we have the haunted house. Now, I'm not talking about a real haunted house here, at least it's not said to be. It's a haunt with actors and props set up to spook people out. There's tons of these things during the Halloween season. I try to get to a couple every year. I have a brew or 6, get chased by Leatherface, good times. But there's one haunt that's said to be so utterly terrifying, so exclusive, that no one has ever been able to make it through. It's so exclusive that you need a special invitation just to go, and you can't just try and show up either because the location changes every year. As for what goes on inside there, only those few who have actually set foot inside have caught a glimpse, but their identities are unknown. We have the legend of the Bundy Man, which started with 2 very real police reports in Fairfax County, Virginia. The first one went down on October 19th, 1970. The young couple was parked on Guinea Road in Burke, just sitting in their car when something moved behind them. Then this guy steps out of the bushes in a white suit with long rabbit ears and starts yelling about private property. Before they can react, he hurls a hatchet straight through their passenger window. The couple floors it out of there, of course. 10 days later, another guy sees him. A security guard named Paul Phillips was checking on a construction site nearby when he spotted a man standing on the porch of an unfinished house in a rabbit suit. Phillips starts talking to him, and the guy immediately starts hacking away at the porch post with a full-sized axe. He tells Phillips he's trespassing, threatens to chop his head off. Phillips goes to grab his piece, coming back, and the rabbit man is now sprinted off into the trees. After those 2 reports, Fairfax police got flooded with calls. More than 50 people claimed that they saw this bunny man. The Washington Post ran multiple stories on him. Some callers even said he ate a guy's runaway cat. But none of this ever went anywhere. No arrest, no name, nothing. And like every good urban legend though, the story mutated. By the 90s, a more dramatic version had spread online, claiming the bunny man was an escaped killer from 1904 who haunted a railroad bridge. Fairfax archivist Brian Conley dug into all of that and found that every detail about the escaped convict story was fake. But what is real are those 2 reports from 1970. As for who the hell the guy was or what happened to him, who knows? I thought I heard about every American cryptid story, but apparently not. And that's surprising because this is a crazy one. So back in 1903 in Van Meter, Iowa, a bunch of townspeople claimed that they saw a large winged creature flying around at night. Multiple witnesses, and respected members of the community too, including a doctor and a banker. They described it as having bat-like wings, a horn on its head that glowed, and gave off a horrible smell. The creature reportedly perched on rooftops, left giant 3-toed tracks in the ground, and shattered a window at one point. People were so freaked out they started forming armed patrols. Newspapers at the time covered this as well, so that, combined with all the witnesses, in this case has a lot more weight than a lot of the rumors and stories you usually read about. One of the creepiest details is that the creature was said to retreat into an old abandoned mine outside town, and some people claim they heard more than one creature moving around in there. After a few nights of chaos though, the sightings suddenly stopped, and everything just kinda went back to normal. But all the original witnesses stood by their stories the rest of their lives. People who hike in the Santa Alicia Mountains always talk about how quiet the place feels. Eerily quiet, almost like something's there just beyond the trees, freaking out all the animals. And maybe that's not just people's imaginations getting the better of them. The Dark Watchers are these tall, human-shaped figures people claim to see standing along the ridges, usually right before sunset. They don't move, they just stand there staring out over the valleys. The Chumash people have been telling stories of these shadowy beings forever. Early settlers mentioned them as well, so it's not some recent internet thing. Hikers say they'll notice a shape on a ridge, perfectly still, almost blended into the rocks. When they look back a second later, it's gone. Nobody Nobody ever reports them coming closer or making any noise, they just watch. Is it a trick of the light? Are people's eyes playing tricks on them with the fog that rolls through the mountains? Sure, maybe. Or maybe when you're hiking out in those desolate mountains and that heavy feeling of being watched presses down around you, there's a reason for it. Maybe something older has been lurking around those mountains long before any roads were built. On a stretch of old railroad tracks outside Gurdon, Arkansas, people keep seeing this mysterious floating light. It shows up in different colors depending on who you ask, sometimes bluish, sometimes orange, and it moves in ways car headlights don't. And not to mention stories of the Gurdon light began long before there were paved roads here, so it's not so easy to write this off as car lights from far away. People say it shows up often when the air is cold or still. If you're walking the tracks at night, you may see the eerie glow hovering above the rails. The story usually goes that a railroad worker was killed during an accident back in the 30s, and the light is said to be his lantern swinging as he wanders around the tracks searching for his head. Whether a railroad worker actually lost his head or not, what does keep the legend alive is how many people claim to see the light. Even TV crews have tried filming it. Sometimes it appears far down the tracks, other times it drifts close enough that people say it feels like it's following or watching them. And when they try to walk toward it, the light just fades or slips into the trees. In parts of Ohio, especially around wooded back roads in Lake County, people grew up hearing about these small, pale, humanoid creatures with oversized heads living out in the forest. Every area has its own twist on the tale, but Ohio's version is the most famous, with people claiming to see these things in the trees while driving at night. The story goes that these melon heads, as they're called, came from a group of children who were experimented on in this old facility out in the woods. One day they rebelled against the mad doctor holding them there and set the place on fire before escaping into the woods. It's hard to trace where that part started, but the sightings are what really gave the legend its weight. Drivers say they've seen things crouched near ditches or darting across the road on all fours. Others have reported hearing strange crying or whispering in the trees. Another Ohio legend, the Loveland Frogman. This one comes from a string of sightings near the Little Miami River. First known sighting was in May of 1955. This lonely stretch of road running along the Miami River. It's in the middle of the night, about 3:30, and a businessman named Robert Honeycutt is driving through the outskirts of Loveland, Ohio. The road is quiet. There's nothing around but trees and the river, but suddenly Honeycutt spots three figures standing on the side of the road, and they're not people. They don't look like any animals he's ever seen either. They're three small, upright shapes. Pulls over and watches them for a few minutes, trying to make sense of what he's looking at. All three are only about 3 or 4 feet tall, with this gray leathery skin that shines a bit in the headlights. Their hands and feet look webbed, and the part that really throws him off is their faces. They're shaped like frogs, big heads with these deep folds where hair should have been. He sits there in the dark, staring at them, trying to stay quiet, when one of the creatures suddenly raises something above its head. Honeycutt described it almost like a wand, and then sparks shoot out of the tip. And that's all he needs. He hits the gas and gets out of there. The next reports wouldn't come until 1972, when a police officer said he saw roughly a 4-foot-tall creature standing upright on the side of the road, which then leapt over the bridge into the river. And his description was eerily similar to the one from 1955, a frog-like figure with leathery skin. A few weeks later, another officer claimed he saw the same thing. Today, the Loveland Frog is seen mostly as a joke, but locals will also say the area does have a certain vibe about it. It's full of old bridges, quiet parks, and spots by the water where headlights only illuminate a tiny piece of the road. So, it's easy to imagine something slipping in and out of view. In April 1977, a teenager named Bill Bartlett was driving with 2 friends, Mike Mazika and Andy Brody, in Dover, Massachusetts, when his headlights hit something climbing along a stone wall. He said it was small, around 3 or 4 feet tall, with a huge smooth head and long thin fingers. He drew it that night, and the sketch pretty much became the face of the Dover demon legend. Now, it's an odd story, sure, but what really keeps this one alive is that 2 more teenagers reported seeing the same creature in different spots over the next 2 days. The groups didn't know each other, but their descriptions matched Bartlett's drawing almost perfectly, and none of them outright claimed that it was an alien or a monster. They just said, well, they saw something that they couldn't explain. No one ever saw it again after those 2 days. Gotta say, that almost makes it creepier to me. A cluster of sightings and then nothing. it makes it less likely to be a misidentified animal or something, because sightings would be way more common in that case. Even now, people in Massachusetts bring it up as one of the weirdest, most concentrated sets of cryptid sightings in the state. On Staten Island, older kids used to scare each other with stories about Cropsey, this man, or perhaps not a man, who lived in the abandoned buildings and woods near the old Willowbrook State School. He was kinda like the local boogeyman, lurking around the edges of the island, watching for youngsters walking alone. For a long time, it was just a story whispered about on the playground, but the atmosphere around Willowbrook made the legend heavier. The school was infamous for how badly people were treated there, and the empty buildings sitting in the woods made the whole area feel haunted before anyone even said the name Cropsey out loud. And throughout the 70s and early 80s, several young people went missing on Staten Island. That gave the legend a much darker tone too. Something about it just felt too real, too grounded to be a simple campfire tale. Next on the list is a story we've all heard at some point in our lives, The Hook. This one goes all the way back to the 50s. The setup is always the same. Couple is sitting in a car on a lover's lane, listening to music, maybe chatting, usually making out though, when they hear a scratch or a thump outside. They debate whether to check it out. The guy usually acts brave, the girl gets nervous. Eventually they drive off, if they survive anyway. When they get home, they find a metal hook hanging from the door handle. The story spread everywhere. High schools, drive-ins, sleepovers. Each version changed slightly depending on the town. People said the man with the hook was an escaped patient from a hospital or some drifter who'd been seen wandering the area earlier in the week. It worked though, because it felt like it could happen anywhere. Every small town has a dark road or a hill where couples go to be alone. The idea that someone was creeping out of the bushes to gut you with their hook hand is a pretty chilling idea. Finally, the Bell Witch story comes from the early 1800s in Adams, Tennessee. It's one of the few haunting legends where the spirits supposedly talked. The Bell family said they were tormented for years by something in their house. They'd hear knocking on the walls, scratching sounds, objects would move on their own. They'd hear a voice that seemed to know everything happening around the property. John Bell, the father, became the main target. The spirit would argue with him, harass him, and threaten his life. And when they had people over, they'd claim to hear the voice too. Some said it would sing or mimic people from across the room, sometimes in a mocking tone, almost like a kid making fun of their sibling. Bell Witch got so famous at the time that even Andrew Jackson, who later became president, reportedly heard about it and visited the farm. The story goes that his group had trouble even getting their wagon onto the property because of whatever was there. John Bell eventually died in 1820. The family believed the witch had something to do with it. People in that part of Tennessee still talk about the Bell Witch Cave, which is near the old property. Some say the strange activity never really stopped. Let's start with one of Australia's most mysterious legends, the bunyip. This creature has supposedly been haunting the swamps, rivers, and billabongs of Australia for centuries. The word bunyip is said to mean devil or evil spirit in some Aboriginal languages, and as you can imagine, that's because this thing is not friendly. The bunyip is often described as this big, terrifying creature, though what it looks like exactly changes depending on who you ask. Some say it's got a more dog-like face, a horse tail with flippers. Other descriptions are more walrus-like. The appearance varies, but the bunyip is more known for how it sounds. It's said to make this low, booming cry that's been reported by people who claim to have heard it in the dead of night. European settlers started hearing about the bunyip in the 1800s. There's a story from 1845 about a man who found some bones near Geelong. When he showed them to an Aboriginal person, the guy immediately recognized them as belonging to a bunyip. This got people talking, and soon enough, there were reports of people being attacked by this creature, with some saying the bunyip would hug its prey to death. Next up is the Orang Mawa. There are legends of giant ape-like creatures all over the world. You got Sasquatch, Yeti, the skunk ape. While in Malaysia, they have the Orang Mawa. This bipedal ape is said to live in the jungle of Johor. It's about 10 feet tall and covered in thick black fur. Sightings of the creature go back centuries. The first documented sighting was in 1871. In terms of more recent sightings though, back in 1995, people talked about finding big footprints with 4 toes. Then in November of 2005, there was a big fuss when 3 workers busy clearing land for a pond claimed that they saw a Mawa family, 2 grown-ups and a youngling strolling near the Kinshin River. After that, they discovered some pretty big footprints, one of them measuring 18 inches apparently. A photo of a new footprint in tar, supposedly from the Mawas, made it into Malaysian newspapers in January of 2006. Batutut. Now, this is basically Borneo's version of Bigfoot. I promise this whole list will not just be big, hairy ape creatures, but it will not be the last either. Batutut, also known as the Bornean orang pendek, is a cryptid said to roam the jungles of Borneo, described as a humanoid creature standing around 7 feet tall. It has long, dark hair covering its body. Witnesses often say it looks a bit like an orangutan, but more human. Sightings of this creature have been reported for centuries, but the indigenous people of Borneo, mostly in the remote rainforests, the creature is said to move fast and is elusive and shy. And hey, I've said it before, I'll say it again. If there's a species of big, hairy ape creatures roaming around somewhere on the planet, I could see them living in this part of the world. The jungle's just vast, dense, teeming with life. Hey, why not, right? Alright, moving away from tall, hairy monsters for a moment to talk about short, hairless monsters, or aliens. Would aliens be considered monsters? I don't know, I'd call them monsters. Would you? Let us know down in the comments. These are important questions that must be answered. Alright, anyway, this photo you're looking at here was taken by a man named Michael Cohen. It was 2011 when two tourists were exploring the Amazon region in Brazil near Manaus, and they snapped this photo. The picture, taken by a writer named Michael Cohen, showed what really looks to be an alien being lurking in the background. The creature in the photo doesn't look like any known animal. It's humanoid, but not quite human, and its shape is unlike any life form that we know. What makes the whole thing even creepier, though, is the fact that the Manaus region is known for having a lot of UFO sightings. People have reported seeing strange lights and crafts in the sky for years, and some think it may be that aliens are interested in all the animal and plant life. It would make sense. I mean, if we had the technology to explore other planets, we'd probably want to study the areas that were the most rich in biodiversity. Another interesting thing, the Brazilian government apparently conducted a secret investigation called Operation Prato in the late 70s. The army was sent to monitor the area for alien activity after reports of UFOs started coming in. The operation was kept under wraps for decades, but it was eventually declassified, revealing that the government had been seriously looking into UFOs and possibly alien encounters in the region. What you're looking at here is footage of one of the last surviving thylacines, aka the Tasmanian tiger. This animal was once found all over Tasmania, Australia, New Guinea, but it was declared extinct in the 1930s. Is it actually extinct, though? The thylacine was a carnivore with a stiff kangaroo-like tail and had a pouch just like a marsupial. The creature was a bit of a mystery, even back in its day. It was a very rare animal. So rare, it was actually thought to be a legend. So it was pretty incredible when these things were actually found to exist, just in really small numbers. And after the last known one died in captivity in 1936, people thought that they were just gone for good. But stories of thylacine sightings have been popping up for decades. There have been reports from locals, hikers, even hunters who claim to have spotted the animal roaming the wilds of Tasmania. Some say they've seen it darting through the bush or crossing roads late at night. One of the most compelling reasons people think the thylacine could still be alive is, well, for one, it used to be alive, and the fact that Tasmania is so remote. The island is full of thick, rugged forests and mountains, places that are hard to explore thoroughly, so it's not completely out of the question that a few of these animals could have managed to stay hidden from humans. It's not just locals who believe in these things' survival either. Some scientists, conservationists, and cryptozoologists also agree, citing strange footage and unclear animal tracks found in the wild. There's even a documentary on the subject, with people traveling deep into the Tasmanian wilderness looking for proof. Let's talk about a creepy legend from the Hawaiian Islands, the Night Marchers. These spirits are said to be the vengeful ghosts of ancient Hawaiian warriors, and they're rumored to haunt certain areas of the islands, especially at night. And if you cross their path, you're in serious trouble. I pretty eerie story comes from a woman named Kay Borlase, who was running a 100-mile endurance race through the Hawaiian rainforests in 2019. The race, known as the Hurt 100, is intense. It's a 20-mile loop through dense, muddy trails, and you gotta run it 5 times, because that's how math works. While running with her friend Cassie, who was taking photos to document the run, Borlase unknowingly captured something strange in one of the pictures. When they looked at one of the photos later that night, they spotted a figure standing in the background, a figure neither of them had seen while running. Borlase took to Reddit to share what happened, saying, "Notice the figure in the frame to the left of my head? We never saw anyone passing us, and there were no statues along the trail. It is not photoshopped or made. This is legit." After doing some research, she and her friend believe they might have seen one of the night marchers. According to Hawaiian legend, anyone who locks eyes with a night marcher will die violently unless they lie down and show respect. Fortunately for Borlase, she didn't see anything directly. The Amarok is a creature from Greenlandic Inuit mythology, and for a long time it was considered nothing more than a myth until an incident in the 19th century. In Inuit folklore, the Amarok is described as a giant wolf, renowned for its enormous size and strength. According to the tales, this wolf is said to hunt alone, especially at night, preying on those who violate traditional taboos or are foolish enough to be outside in the dark. In the 19th century, the perception of the Amarok actually changed from being nothing more than folklore to possible reality. So a creature fitting the description of the legendary wolf was shot, described as a truly immense pure white wolf. The hunter who killed the creature sent its pelt to the Copenhagen Museum in Denmark, and this was seemingly concrete evidence of the existence of a massive white wolf in the Arctic region. Now, whether this thing was actually the legendary Amarok or just an especially large wolf remains to be seen, but if you ever find yourself in Denmark, check out the museum for yourself. Maybe that pelt is still on display.
The tale of the Hagbui comes from ancient Icelandic and Norse folklore, civilizations that had a very different perspective on spirits and the afterlife. They believed that spirits did not ascend or descend to any kind of heaven or hell-like realms, but rather they remained in the bodies of the deceased until said bodies became disturbed. Because of this, ancient Nordics and Icelanders took great care and many precautions when burying their dead. Deceased members of the community were buried with their toes tied together and needles in their feet. Furthermore, because these civilizations believed that a deceased person could only enter a home from the door which they left, when the corpse was removed from a home, the entrance from which they left was promptly sealed up to protect against any kind of re-entry.
And now a creature from Zimbabwean folklore, the Kangamato. Descriptions of this creature vary somewhat, but most accounts agree that it's this big, nasty bird or bat with a wingspan that can rival your typical Cessna plane. Reports often mention a beak full of sharp teeth. It's usually depicted looking almost like a pterodactyl. Locals in Zambia and Zimbabwe have been talking about the Kangamato for ages. The name itself translates to breaker of boats in the local language, which doesn't exactly inspire warm and fuzzy feelings. One of the reasons this cryptid stands out is because it's not just something that lurks in the depths of some dense forest somewhere. No, instead the Kangamato supposedly likes to crash parties near rivers and lakes. It's said to have a thing for feasting on unsuspecting folks who dare to venture too close to the water's edge. So imagine trying to enjoy a peaceful picnic or a birthday party, and then suddenly you're in a scene from Jurassic Park.
The Japanese legend of Baku, the dream-eating spirit animal, has been around far longer than you or I. But unlike the subjects of all the other legends on this list, the Baku is actually a malevolent spirit that looks kind of like a tapir, a pig-shaped animal with a long snout, and this spirit eats nightmares. While this legend is incredibly popular in Japan, the story of the Baku actually started in China prior to the 14th century. And in some versions of this legend, in order to invoke the protection of the spirit, who has also been described as having the legs of a tiger, the head of an elephant, and the piercing eyes of a rhinoceros, one must draw a picture of the spirit before falling asleep. Now, after learning about all of these other haunted legends, I think I know what I'll be doing tonight.
The Kajanok is a cryptid creature said to inhabit the shallow remote bays and lakes of Greenland and the Canadian Arctic. It's described as a colossal aquatic arachnid, which certainly conjures up some pretty terrifying images. It's said to patiently wait for prey on the seabed near shoals and inlets, chomping its seals as they swim overhead. The giant sea spider depiction is often more common for the Canadian Inuit, drawing comparisons to the appearance of a huntsman spider, but on a much grander scale, obviously. A kayaker near Baffin Island in the early 20th century claimed to have witnessed this creature. Venturing into western Greenland, the Kajanok is described as more of a sea scorpion around the size of a rowboat. Lakes Natsilik and Umanak are said to be its home. Which version of this creature would you prefer to meet? Giant sea scorpion or giant spider? Take your pick. They're both bad, but I think a spider-looking thing would be much creepier to me.
And finally, we have the ancient Japanese legend of Nu, a mythical creature with the body of a tiger, the face of a monkey, and the tail of a snake, said to be the harbinger of sickness and bad luck. The Nu are not new at all. In fact, they are some of the oldest creatures described in Japanese legend, with some tales of the beast dating all the way back to the 12th century. In the Tale of Heike, a Japanese story about the ancient 12th century war, the Nu was said to have visited the Emperor of Japan, who became ill not long after. Furthermore, after the visit, every time the Emperor closed his eyes, he was bombarded with vicious nightmares. The ailments and torment continued until one day a brave soldier fired an arrow at the Nu and killed it. To this day, it's believed by some that the mound at the shore of the sea in Japan is the final resting place of the fearsome beast.
For those who grew up in Staten Island, the story of Cropsey was a pretty common campfire tale. It was a boogeyman with a hook for a hand who'd supposedly escaped from an asylum and lived in the old abandoned tunnels beneath the Willowbrook State School, waiting to snatch kids who wandered too far. Most people thought it was just a way to keep kids from playing in the woods, but in the 70s and 80s, children actually started vanishing. The monster turned out to be a man named Andre Rand. He wasn't a supernatural entity, he was worse. A real man. He was a former janitor at Willowbrook who stayed on the grounds after the school was shut down. He was living in a makeshift campsite right in the middle of those woods. In 1987, a search party finally found the remains of a young girl buried just a few yards from where Rand was living. Turned out he really was using that tunnel system from the legends to move around the island undetected. The hook hand, that was made up, but the man living in the ruins of an asylum was terrifyingly real. There's an old story that sometimes the props you see in carnival haunted houses, either skeletons or mummies hanging from the ceilings, aren't actually made of plastic or wax. The rumor was that some cash-strapped carnivals used real human remains because they were cheaper than professional props back in the day. Well, in 1976, a camera crew was filming at a funhouse in Long Beach, California. They tried to move a wax mannequin that was hanging from a noose, and when the arm snapped off, they saw actual human bone. It wasn't a prop. It was the body of Elmer McCurdy, an outlaw who died in a 1911 shootout. Because no one claimed him, an undertaker mummified him and started renting him out to carnivals. And for 60 years, his body was passed around from sideshows to wax museums, with owners eventually forgetting the mummy had actually been a real person. By the time he was found, he'd been covered in neon orange paint. He was finally given a proper burial in Oklahoma with a massive block of concrete poured over his casket to make sure he'd never become a prop again. For decades, people in western Pennsylvania told stories about the Green Man or Charlie No Face. The legend went that a glowing, faceless man haunted a specific railroad tunnel at night. It was said that he was radioactive or electrical, and if you got too close, he'd stall your car engine. The legend was actually based on a real man named Raymond Robinson. When he was 9, he was severely disfigured in a massive electrical accident that cost him his nose, his eyes, and one of his arms. Raymond was actually said to be a very kind-hearted guy, but he only felt comfortable going out for walks in the middle of the night. He didn't want to frighten people with his appearance, and he did not want the attention. But teens would drive out specifically to try and spot him after stories started to spread. In reality, the glow people reported was just the reflection of their own headlights off his skin. He wasn't a monster at all. He was just a guy who'd survived a tragedy and wanted to enjoy the night air in peace. He passed away in 1985. This next one's a pretty common trope, finding a dead body under a mattress. A couple checks into a hotel, notices a nasty odor in the room, and complains to the staff. Staff come to check, but the room seems fine. Well, after a night of sleeping on the bed, they finally lift the mattress to find a decomposing body hidden inside the bed frame. Sounds like a horror movie scene, but it actually has happened dozens of times. There have been cases in cities like Las Vegas and Atlantic City, and in one 1999 case in Colorado Springs, a couple actually slept on a bed for 3 nights. They'd noticed an off smell though, and the hotel staff had been trying to cover it up with air freshener. When the staff finally checked, they found that the wooden base of the bed had been hollowed out to hide the body of a woman who'd been missing for over a week. And again, that's just one example. There are tons of horror stories like this. Criminals had frequently used this tactic because they know hotel staff rarely lift the heavy mattresses during a standard cleaning. It's the reason most modern hotels have switched to solid platform beds. Anyway, moral of the story, trust your nose. Also, don't kill people and hide them in hotel beds, but I think that's obvious. We're all familiar with the ghost stories surrounding mirrors, mainly Bloody Mary. The 1992 movie Candyman also played with this idea. There's actually a real case that was the direct inspiration for the movie. It happened in a Chicago housing project in 1987. A woman named Ruthie Mae McCoy called the police, terrified because someone was trying to come through her medicine cabinet. It sounded pretty far-fetched, obviously. Ruthie also had a bit of a history of paranoia, so when the officers didn't find any signs of a break-in at the front door, they left. Well, a few days later, she was found dead. The investigation revealed there was a massive flaw in these apartments. The medicine cabinets in those buildings were built back to back, so all anyone needed to do was unscrew their cabinet and they could climb through the wall and step right into their neighbor's bathroom. People had been using these mirror doors to move between apartments and commit robberies and worse for months. For 27 years, people living around North Pond, Maine told stories about a mountain man or a ghost that lived in the woods. He was blamed for thousands of tiny thefts, food, batteries, and propane, but he was never seen, never left footprints, and seemed to vanish into thin air. A lot of people thought he was just a myth, but in 2013, the so-called ghost was finally caught on a trail camera. His name was Christopher Knight. He'd walked in the woods in 1986 at the age of 20 and stayed there for nearly 3 decades without ever talking to another human being. He lived in a tiny camouflaged tent site just a few hundred yards from the cabins that he was raiding. He survived the freezing Maine winters by wrapping himself in stolen sleeping bags and never lighting a fire because he knew the smoke would give him away. He wasn't some ghostly entity, but there really was a guy living right in people's backyards for 27 years without anyone ever seeing his face. In 1983, the video game industry crashed so hard that Atari was stuck with millions of copies of the E.T. game, which was considered the worst game ever made. Legend said that to hide their shame and the massive financial loss, they drove a fleet of trucks into the New Mexico desert in the middle of the night and buried the games in a secret mass grave under a layer of concrete. It's a pretty ridiculous story. Unfortunately, real life is not a sitcom, so this has to be a tall tale, or at best an exaggeration, right? For 30 years, that's what people thought. But in 2014, a documentary crew got permission to dig up an old landfill in Alamogordo. After hours of digging, they hit a layer of crushed plastic and cardboard and started pulling out hundreds of intact ET cartridges. The graveyard was real. Atari had been so overwhelmed by retailers returning the games that they literally could not store them all, so they decided to just bury their shame. In the 1940s, a phantom was said to be stalking a small town in Illinois. Legend described a tall, thin man in dark clothes who would spray a sweet-smelling gas through open bedroom windows, leaving his victims paralyzed and nauseated before vanishing into the night. This started in September 1944. The panic was so intense that the town of Mattoon was put under armed patrol. A lot of people dismiss this story as mass hysteria caused by the stress of the war, but there were physical details that didn't really fit that theory. Some victims had real symptoms like swollen lips and chemical burns, and police found window screens that had been cut, on the outside. Whether it was actually an attacker with knowledge of chemistry or maybe a leak from a nearby plant, there's definitely some truth to the Mad Gasser story. And, let's be real, compared to most urban legends, this one really isn't that far-fetched. There's a common horror trope about an eccentric man who lives alone in a house filled with life-size dolls. The legend says he treats them like they're alive, but the neighbors swear that the dolls look too realistic, almost like they're made of real skin. In 2011, a case unraveled that has to be one of the creepiest in Russia. Anatoly Moskvin was a seemingly regular guy. Actually, he was a brilliant historian, a successful, learned man. So when police found out that a series of grave robberies led back to him, they were pretty surprised. And that shock turned to total revulsion when they entered his apartment to find 29 life-size dolls dressed in stockings and dresses. They weren't actually dolls, though. Moskvin had spent years digging up the remains of young girls from local cemeteries. He'd mummified them using salt and baking soda, stuffed them with padding, and even installed music boxes inside their chests so they would sing when he touched them. Gave them all names and threw birthday parties for them, treated them like they were alive. One of the creepiest stories I've ever heard, I think. This is one of the oldest fears in the world, that someone could be mistakenly declared dead, buried, and then wake up in total darkness, clawing at the inside of their coffin. One of my biggest fears, I think. That's why I don't want to be buried in a coffin at all. Send my body out into space, just let me drift into a black hole or something. Sounds doable. Anyway, the legend says that when old cemeteries are moved, workers sometimes find scratch marks on the inside of the lids. Well, in the 19th century, this was actually a very real risk. Before modern technology, doctors sometimes had a hard time telling the difference between a deep coma and death. This fear was so common that people invented safety coffins with bells and air tubes. One documented case from 1891 involves a woman named Octavia Hatcher. She was buried but wasn't actually dead. She'd just been unresponsive. She'd suffered some sort of mysterious sleeping sickness. Basically, she was in a coma. Well, when several other people in the town caught the same sleeping sickness and eventually woke up, her husband was like, oh my god, and he had her exhumed. And when they opened the coffin, they found the inner lining shredded and Octavia's fingernails raw from her frantically trying to crawl her way out. Do you ever still have that small little voice in the back of your head warning you not to step out of bed late at night in case some ghoulish entity is waiting underneath to grab you by the ankles and drag you under? Tales of monsters dwelling in closets and under beds have been told since the dawn of time, across cultures all around the world. For Germans, the boogeyman is known as Bootsman. In some stories, he appears as a goblin. In others, he's a more formless, shadowy entity, but his purpose is always the same: stealing misbehaving youngsters. Parents would warn their young ones that if they didn't go to bed on time or got up in the middle of the night, they might get paid a visit from Bootsman, who'd either crawl out from the closet or under their beds and whisk them away into the shadows, never to be seen again. Medieval-style parenting at its finest.
Ancient Mesopotamia is known for being the birthplace of writing and subsequently recorded history. Its people, the Sumerians, also built the world's first cities and developed the oldest known political and administrative systems. While these advancements did and still do set the civilization apart from many others, it does not mean that they were exempt from the presence of haunting legends designed to understand the world and, in some cases, scare the younger generations. One example of this is Gidom, or the death spirit. In ancient Mesopotamia, it was believed that when a person died, they could still appear to the living in the form of a Gidom, so long as their remains were being taken care of by the living on Earth. The belief shaped the way Sumerians and other Mesopotamian civilizations cared for their dead. In order to maintain a connection to the Gidom of the deceased, they would adorn burial sites with offerings and gifts, which would allow the Gidom version of their loved ones to thrive in the afterlife. Graves left barren resulted in Gidoms eating nothing but dust and becoming trapped in a sort of purgatory realm. The idea of mortality and life after death was as difficult then to comprehend as it is now, and so this ritual allowed the living to continue to care for their lost loved ones in the hopes of them one day appearing appearing in the form of a Gidim, which could be called upon at any time with the use of a summoning ritual. Whether or not that ritual actually worked is an answer unfortunately lost to ancient history. Another legend stemming from the Sumerian civilization in Mesopotamia that supports the idea of Gidims is the legend of Enkidu, mythological wartime comrade and friend of Gilgamesh and the former king of Uruk. In the legend, Enkidu is dead, living inside of a rather desolate afterlife where he is being held prisoner. Knowing the fate of his friend, Gilgamesh prays for the release of Enkidu from the realm, a request granted by the sun god who returns Enkidu to Earth. When Gilgamesh asks about the afterlife, Enkidu begins describing his dreary existence of being deceased, forced to survive off dirt, and not being able to participate in adult activities. Don't know why he added that, but apparently it was important. But he continued on to say that the conditions varied and that they were actually dependent upon the life a person lived prior to their death. Those who had 7 or more children were quite comfortable in the afterlife because of the fact that they had plenty of living relatives supplying their grave sites with food and drink. Those who had less children had less comfortable lives, but were still nowhere near as uncomfortable as the childless, who were condemned to starve and endure everlasting loneliness. Furthermore, Enkidu described the differences in conditions for people who were kind in life and respected the teachings of their elders and those who were not, with those who were and did having quite comfortable afterlives and those who weren't and did not eating nothing but dirt and existing in complete isolation. I wonder what kind of person Enkidu was to earn himself such a negative experience in his, albeit brief, afterlife.
The Nuklave is a creature from Scottish folklore, specifically from the Orkney Islands. This thing is about as terrifying and gnarly looking as it gets. So imagine this horse-like demon with no skin, all its muscles and veins are exposed, and not only that, but it has this human-like torso growing out of its back. The two things are just kind of fused together in this fleshy monstrosity. The creature is said to be very tall and has a horrible decaying face. It lives in the sea or marshlands and comes out to cause trouble and spread disease. In some stories, it's responsible for droughts or crop failures as well. And people believe that if the Nuklave was near, it meant something terrible was going to happen to the land or to the people living there. One of the more chilling parts of the legend is that the Nuklave can control the weather. If it's angry, it can bring storms and make the sea rough, which was especially frightening back in the day for people who relied so much on fishing. And we're gonna start this list off with the most common form of the skinwalker, the one seen in Navajo folklore. I'll have to apologize from the jump here because skinwalkers are not supposed to be discussed. It's said that they will hunt down whoever speaks them out loud. And details about skinwalkers are not something that the Navajo like discussing with outsiders. Because of this, there's a lot of mystery surrounding these entities, and most of the stories on this list probably don't resemble the more traditional aspects of the creature. But in general, though, skinwalkers are malevolent entities that can take on the form of a variety of different animals, commonly wolves or coyotes. These creatures were formerly practitioners of dark magic, witches who committed particularly awful acts of some kind, like taking the life of a family member, for example. Skinwalkers are also said to be able to take on human forms, appearing as a friend or loved one. And at number 9, we have the Skinwalker on the Road legend. So there are a variety of different tales in this realm of skinwalker folk, but these are probably the best examples of the more Anglo-American versions of the creature, veering away from the traditional Native American depictions. These types of stories are really what ignited the popularity of skinwalkers on apps like TikTok, for example, where you have found footage of a supposed skinwalker type creature lurking behind bushes or on the side of the road, stuff like that. In general, these stories feature someone driving down a desolate road at night. Maybe they see someone stranded on the side of the road. In some versions, they might pull over and get out of the car to help the person before realizing they've encountered a malevolent entity. Other versions are more subtle, where someone just sees something strange on the side of the road, a deer walking on its hind legs before running off into the forest while laughing, that kind of thing. Speaking of skinwalkers being featured in videos, though, we have this next clip originally posted to TikTok by It's Louis Vuitton. In the modern era, especially with the rise of the internet, video has added a whole new layer to the way urban legends are are spread, and creatures in traditional folklore sometimes make an appearance, creating a kind of new level of buzz around them. In this video, a few guys are driving down a quiet road in the dead of night, using their flashlights to try and spot a buck that one of them said they saw. In the distance, one of them spots some type of figure, thinking it may be the animal they spotted earlier. When they shine their light on it though, whatever it is looks too human to be a buck, but not normal enough to be human. A pale, slender creature that makes a terrifying screeching sound before it begins rushing towards the camera. In at number 7 is a Skinwalker encounter story posted to Reddit by Schnizzly. It was almost midnight, and they lay inside their tent attempting to sleep. The tent was pitched near a cluster of standing dead trees, which would emit creaking sounds when the wind blew. This night, however, was oddly silent and motionless. Gradually, they started hearing the distinct noises of cracking sticks and footsteps drawing nearer over a span of about 15 minutes. The sounds were loud enough to convince them that a bear was approaching. The unseen presence came so close that it seemed no more than 15 feet away. The cracking sticks and soft steps persisted, and the Redditor, growing fearful, decided to shout out loudly. All they heard was an eerie silence, with no signs of the creature fleeing. They sat in silence, attempting to rationalize the situation, and about 20 minutes later, the silence was shattered by an unsettling, unnatural noise. It mirrored the timbre and volume of the trees creaking outside, but just didn't sound ordinary. The sound began and sustained the exact same note for a prolonged 5 seconds or even more. An unnatural kind of drone. There was no wind, and the noise had no correlation to the usual tree creaking sounds. They couldn't sleep the rest of the night. It wasn't until weeks later they made the connection that skinwalkers were known to imitate sounds in a similar manner. And at number 6, we have Chased. This story was just recently posted to Reddit by user Dog with Keyboard Woof. Apparently this happened in Western Cape, South Africa 13 years ago. They wrote, "A friend of mine and I were 15 at the time. We were walking home at midnight in a small coastal town in winter, so there wasn't really anybody around. We heard dogs barking up ahead, and we thought, damn, those dogs can hear us all the way from down here, and we carried on walking when I got a weird feeling, but ignored it. As we got to the corner, in a split second we heard movement next to us and instinctively pulled away when a tall, like 7-foot plus, all white figure with no hair came out of the bushes. At this point, we were running away full speed. My friend even shouted at me to wait for him because I am a lot quicker. I turned around and I couldn't effing believe what I was seeing chasing behind him. We managed to zigzag our way around because we'd grown up here and we knew shortcuts and hid in a building site for hours before eventually running home." At our number 5 spot, we have Knecht Ruprecht. This is a figure from German folklore who hangs out with St. Nicholas during Christmas. He's kind of like his disciplinary sidekick. Knecht Ruprecht translates to farmhand Rupert in English, and his job is to assist St. Nicholas in figuring out who's been naughty or nice. So while St. Nick is all about the rewards for the good ones, his buddy handles the not so nice list. They're kind of like a good cop, bad cop duo. Next, Ruprecht shows up in some towns dressed in tattered clothes, carrying a bag of ashes and a switch. Yes, a switch, not the electric kind. He dishes out punishment to youngsters who haven't been on their best behavior. Some versions of the story say that Knecht Ruprecht gives his victims a chance to redeem themselves. He might ask if they know their prayers or if they've been doing their chores. If the answer is good, they might get some treats. If not, they could end up with a spanking. In some places, the tradition of Knecht Ruprecht has evolved into a more festive and less scary character, with people dressing up as him during Christmas parades or celebrations, but the core idea remains. He's the one you don't want to meet if you've been slacking on the good behavior front. Next up, we have the Christmas Witch. This is another character from European folklore. In some cultures, there's a tale of a Christmas witch who doesn't ride on broomsticks, delivering presents. Instead, she's on the lookout for misbehaving folks during the holiday season. Legend has it that this Christmas witch wanders the streets on Christmas Eve, peeking into houses to see if everything is in order. If she catches wind of any bad behavior, or disobedience, she might decide to bring some not so festive consequences. Although, according to this list, a lot of bad stuff happens around Christmas, so maybe it is festive. Now, the specifics of the Christmas witch legend vary, but common themes include the witch leaving coal or sticks in the shoes of the naughty ones instead of gifts. In some regions, people incorporate the Christmas witch into their holiday traditions. They might tell stories about her to encourage good behavior in children, or even stage events where someone dresses up as the Christmas witch to keep the holiday vibes in check. At number 3, we have the living nutcracker. The story goes that an old toy maker put a spell on a nutcracker, giving it life. Not Pinocchio style, but enough to make it move around when no one's looking. Imagine waking up in the middle of the night and seeing a wooden nutcracker roaming around your house. According to the tale, it supposedly has a mission as well, to protect something valuable hidden in your house. As for what that thing is, different versions of the tale vary. So right now this all sounds pretty good, but the nutcracker isn't always friendly. Some versions say it's got a temper, especially if it thinks you're a threat to whatever it's guarding. So you go to grab a midnight snack and suddenly you're face to face with an angry wooden soldier with a nut-crushing jaw. Alright, here's one you've probably all heard of, but it had to make the list. It's Krampus, everybody. While St. Nicholas is busy rewarding the good kids, Krampus is out there dealing with the naughty ones. He's a horned, hairy creature with a long, pointed tongue and a bag or basket on his back. And that bag, well, it's not for carrying presents. Krampus is known for punishing misbehaving youngsters. He might swat them with bundles of birch branches or throw them in his sack to carry them away to who knows where. At the very least, he'll be leaving lumps of coal in your stocking. In many regions, there's a tradition called Krampusnacht, where people dress up as Krampus and roam the streets, scaring the living daylights out of anyone in their path. Now, the Krampus legend, it's been around for ages. It's become a mix of folklore and modern pop culture in recent years. Krampus shows up in tons of movies, many of which you can find for 10 cents in discount bins or for free on Tubi. Quality flicks. You can even find Krampus greeting cards, because nothing says Merry Christmas like a horned devil monster who terrorizes young people. Alright, let's wrap things up with the Bellschnickel, yet another character from German folklore. Europeans really do Christmas spooky. A Bellschnickel is like the eccentric uncle of holiday characters. He's known for his distinctive appearance, often dressed in tattered fur-covered clothing, and he carries a switch or a whip. Oh joy. Now, unlike some of his more extreme counterparts, Bellschnickel is not necessarily a punisher of the naughty. Instead, he's more about maintaining order and tradition during the holidays. His approach is a bit different. He might give small gifts and treats to well-behaved folks, but if someone has been a bit unruly or neglectful of traditions, they might get a smack with his switch. And we're kicking off the list with the dead body decoration urban legend. This legend is pretty simple. Out of all the Halloween decorations adorning people's homes in the Halloween season, there have been cases where particularly sick and twisted individuals have strung up real dead bodies for display, hiding them in plain sight. This is, of course, utter nonsense, right? Well, things like this have actually been known to happen. The most famous case is probably one that happened in 2015 in Ohio. People passed by a house for a while thinking they just decorated their fence with a highly realistic dead corpse prop. And yeah, it wasn't a prop. It was actually the body of 31-year-old Rebecca Cade. There was a rock right next to her body, which was slumped over the fence, and she'd reportedly gotten into a heated argument with a man named Donnie Kohinoor the night before, who was arrested at his sister's home. If you are liking our channel so far, then don't forget to hit that subscribe button. You don't want to miss out on any videos coming at you on the daily. Number 9, the legend of Stingy Jack. So the legend goes that once upon a time in Ireland, there was a tricky fellow named Stingy Jack. Now, Stingy Jack was quite the character. He was a master at swindling, cheating, and just all around mischief. He managed to trick the devil not once, but twice. The first time, Jack invited the devil for a drink, but didn't want to pay for his booze, so he convinced the devil to turn himself into a coin to settle the tab. But instead of using the coin to actually pay what he owed, he just pocketed it, trapping the devil in his pocket next to a silver cross. Then, Jack struck another deal with the devil. This time he asked Satan to climb a tree to grab some delicious apples. While the devil was up in the branches, Jack carved a cross on the trunk, trapping the devil yet again. And when Stingy Jack finally met his end, both heaven and hell wanted nothing to do with him because of his trickery and deceit. So he was left wandering the dark, empty space between worlds, carrying only a burning coal inside a turnip to light his way. People started carving scary faces into turnips and potatoes, placing candles inside to ward off Stingy Jack and other wandering evil spirits on All Hallows Eve. And when Irish immigrants brought this tradition to America, they found pumpkins were perfect for carving, leading to the birth of the jack-o'-lantern as we know it today. At number 8, we have an urban legend about a massacre said to take place at Julia Tutwiler Hall in Alabama on Halloween night. So the legend goes that every Halloween, this female dorm is under threat of something. Everything from a disaster's gonna hit to the tortured spirit of a former student will roam the halls and take someone's life. So why on Halloween, and why are the circumstances of this supposed horrific event so vague? Well, this all started because of an interpretation of a prediction made by Nostradamus. Apparently, he predicted that sometime between 1960 and 1990, a terrible massacre would happen at a girls' dormitory close to a cemetery and a mental asylum. Oddly specific, so odd that it almost sounds totally misinterpreted. It was. But the legend stuck around for a while, and with every Halloween that rolled around, whispers of something awful happening at the dorm would begin to spread. A Reddit user by the name of @132pm even made a post about this urban legend, talking about how they'd have co-ed parties in the dorms on Halloween night, just to make sure everyone got through the night without being massacred by some Jason Voorhees-esque ghoul. And at number 7, we have the Halloween mirror ritual. As the tale goes, on the night of Halloween, when the veil between the living and the dead is at its thinnest, one can attempt the Halloween mirror ritual to catch a glimpse of their future spouse. So the ritual must be performed at the stroke of midnight. Make sure the room is dimly lit with just a few candles. Find a mirror, preferably a large one, and position yourself in front of it. Some say an antique mirror adds to the ritual's effectiveness, but any mirror will do. In your hands, hold a candle that has not been used before. The candlelight should be your only source of light. So now, staring directly into your own eyes in the mirror, chant the incantation. Halloween night, spirits and sprites, show to me my future delights. Who shall be my partner in life? Show me this night. As you continue to gaze into the mirror, be observant. Some say you might catch a glimpse of a shadowy figure or the face of your future spouse, hopefully. Could be a clear image or something more symbolic like an initial or a symbol representing their personality. Once you feel a presence or witness a sign, quickly blow out the candle, step away from the mirror. Some believe that leaving the candle burning could invite unwanted spirits into your home. And at number 5, we have Saved by a Phone Call. I don't even care if this story was completely made up. It's a chilling one. It was posted to Reddit by user 20 Green Beans and goes as follows. Last night, I had definitely what will go down as one of my most bone-chilling memories. I was wide awake and nowhere near tired. I was reading in my living room near the window. From outside, I heard my sister's voice calling for me. She was out all day, out of town. I thought she was just coming by to show me the dresses she picked out to wear to the wedding she's attending this week. Us both being night owls, I thought nothing of it. I heard the voice yell for me again, so I looked out the window. Downstairs, I saw her just standing there looking up into the living room window. She motioned for me to come down, but her body language didn't look like hers. It was rather stiff and her face didn't move as I heard her yell for me again. Figuring she was just too tired to come up, I turned to grab my shoes and head downstairs. But then this is what kept me up all night. My phone went off. It was a phone call coming in from my sister. I answered it to say that I'd be right down. She's always been a rather impatient person, so before she could say anything, I just said, yeah, I see you, I'm coming down. There was a slight pause, and she goes, No, I just got home. You aren't answering my video chat requests. I want to show you my dresses I'm gonna wear. My stomach sank. I looked out the window. What I thought was her wasn't there. I know it would have had to been something trying to imitate her because she called out in her exact voice and inflection, using two nicknames that only she uses. Creeped out, I quickly video called her. From her phone camera, I saw the familiar background of her bedroom. I've never felt so unsettled in my whole life. And at number 4, we have The Grove. This story was shared to Reddit by user Hey Johnny Utah. This didn't happen to me, but a very close friend of mine. Patrick's story kept me from going back to a favorite backcountry secret stash. He was leaving the area one morning and had been camping there a couple days and said there was a coyote that always seemed to be close by, like in his peripheral vision, but never overt. He loaded up his truck and started to drive down the wash out to the fire road. At the end of the wash, he could see the coyote following him. When he pulled onto the road, it was running next to him. Now he was freaked out, so he sped up. He said he was going 35 or so and it was running along beside him. Definitely not possible. When he looked back, the coyote was running on 2 legs and was wearing what Patrick said looked like buckskin pants. An instant later, it was a person wearing a coyote fur keeping pace with his truck. When he looked again, it was gone. We never went back to the Grove after that. Too freaky. So you can kind of see the Skinwalker on the Road legends kind of making their way into that one, which is interesting. At number 3, you have a story posted by Punch Drunk AA. So this happened about 12 years ago. My family owns a farm in the heart of an Indian reservation. One winter I was home for Christmas, taking care of the farm while my parents were away Christmas shopping. As I was home by myself, way late in the night, and I hear all the cows freaking out. I knew it had to be the wild dogs that are rampant in the area, so I throw on some boots, grab a shotgun, load it up, and head out to the field. This was a perfect scenario for a horror movie. It was cloudy, but there was a full moon, and it was breaking through the clouds just right to light up all the snow. I ran out into the middle of the field, and just in time, I see 2 dogs. They were standing up, facing each other, and fighting. I think, perfect. 2 for 1. So I pump a shell into the chamber of my 12 gauge and then it happened. The 2 dogs heard the rack. They both stopped, looked over at me and ran away on their back legs. Immediately I froze and every ghost story about skinwalkers and all the other native legends I grew up with flew through my mind. In at number 2, Skinwalker Ranch in Utah is known for its eerie stories surrounding skinwalkers. Over the years, witnesses have reported encountering unidentified flying objects as well, witnessing cattle mutilations, and having first-hand encounters with what really sounds like skinwalkers. Scientific investigations into these strange occurrences have been inconclusive, with researchers unable to provide definitive explanations for these events. The mysteries surrounding Skinwalker Ranch are just too numerous to count. In 1996, the ranch gained significant attention when it was purchased by billionaire businessman Robert Bigelow, who established the National Institute for Discovery Science to study the paranormal activity reported on the property. NIDS conducted research on the ranch, employing a team of scientists and researchers, investigators. Various television shows and documentaries have explored Skinwalker Ranch, cementing it really as this hotbed of paranormal activity. And finally, we have an encounter story that was posted by Weld Form. It goes as follows. We live in an apartment complex at the edge of town in Illinois. Right next to us is a woodsy area full of coyotes and deer and lots of birds, so it's pretty lively. Last night at 3 a.m., she went outside to grab a case of water from the trunk of our car, and when she was grabbing it, she claimed she heard someone say, "Hello?" in a girl's voice coming from the woods. She couldn't see anything, but she replied back, confused, saying, "Hello back." Whatever it was ended up saying, "Can somebody help me?" And that's when she got the chills and ran as fast as she could back inside our house. Right before she entered the house, she said she heard it again, with the voice getting closer, asking for help. But instead of a normal girl voice, it turned into a girl voice that didn't even sound real. She couldn't explain the change in that voice. Plus, she said afterwards, thinking about it, that the voice sounded familiar, but couldn't point out whose it was. Why I believe she wasn't BSing is because 2 years living here, we've never talked about things like this. And when she rushed inside, she startled me because her face was in shock. She was breathing heavily. I thought she'd seen something or heard a gunshot. I don't know.